Treaty 7 territory, traditional and ancestral territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Kainai, Piikani, and Siksika, as well as the Tsuut'ina Nation and Stoney Nakoda First Nation. We acknowledge that this territory is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3, within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who have lived in and cared for these lands for generations. And we are grateful to be here to lend our conversation in what is hopefully a positive way. And now I would like to give it away to our panelists to give a brief introduction on who they are, the kind of mediums they work in, and then we'll take it from there. Who would like to start? Eva.
Okay. I'm Eva. I'm an artist in Threading Black, which is kind of the start of this whole panel, I suppose. And I'm a fiber artist. I'm also the curatorial resident at Stride Gallery. And yeah, that's me.
Hi everyone, I'm Simone Saunders and I'm a textile artist living in Calgary, and I graduated from AU Arts a year ago now, a year. And yeah, I practice my medium of tufting and punch needle. I integrate the two and I create large tapestry style wall art. And Eva and I are both contributing our works to the show downstairs, Threading Black.
Hi everyone, I'm Mia and I am an artist currently based in Amiskoski, Letskagan. And yeah, I guess my specialization is in ceramics, but I've learned in the last year to kind of just like try some new things and kind of finding my way through the interdisciplinary realm, and excited to kind of see what the future is going to hold and how that kind of opening up of materiality is going to affect my ideas and practice.
Hi everyone, my name is Natalie Rodriguez. I work at the Alberta, I almost called it the wrong name, the Alberta University of the Arts. You'd think after all this time I would remember. I apologize. I teach in the glass program. My practice is between glass and drawing, and so I look at transformative experience in liminal space as sort of a grounding in my research practice. So I'm very excited to be here.
I'm Nate Williams. I'm a fourth-year jewelry student at Alberta University of the Arts. I am hopefully graduating this year.
Awesome. Thank you all very much. I am, again, thrilled to have you all here. Like, there's so many different mediums that we all work with. And one of the things that Mia said, which I thought was just fantastic, is that we're all trying new things, especially since this past year when how we usually work just kind of got turned on its head. And sometimes we find ourselves drawn to new mediums that we never thought we'd work with. Like for myself, I decided, hey, let's just learn 3D printing in all the free time that you have. Yeah, it's going okay. Touch and go for a while, but it's going okay. And I guess for me, one of the things that even when it gets frustrating that I liked about it was that it meant something to me. It was outside of the frustrating bits. It was this meditative process of just kind of seeing where the material led me. And I guess one of the things I always want to ask different people that, you know, work with craft in different ways is, how do you find meaning in the work that you do? Like, what is, even when it gets to that part where you're just like, I don't really know if I have the follow through, what's the thing that motivates and keeps you going?
I can touch on that. For me, my practice really stems from really amplifying Black womanhood and narratives within that. And so, you know, my inspiration, I'm just finding, is endless within that. And for me, even when I'm, you know, transfixed at the loom and creating a piece and choosing colors, there is that meditative quality that comes with working on a craft that requires so much time, you know. And so I've discovered a lot of ritual within my work, and it's something that I didn't anticipate at first when I started tufting. And because it's rooted for me in such a powerful context, I have that invitation for my ancestors to really channel through me, or to fill the space. And so it's become quite a sacred thing for me to really approach the loom every day, and honor that, and be inspired by so many different things.
It can come sometimes in the most surprising ways. Like I know in some of like Natalie's drawings, there is this element of kind of losing yourself in mark making. And I see it actually show up even in the glass, which is a more deliberate and lengthy process. Like, what does that feel like for you?
Well, I think I've come to realize, I was lucky enough to do a sabbatical a few years ago where I had dreamt that my practice was one way for a long time, right? Thinking, I like to read books, I like to do a ton of drawings, I like to make a ton of maquettes, I like to make the work. And I like to think of it as being somewhat academic. And it turns out that what I'm doing when I'm doing those drawings, I wasn't thinking about the step before that. And so the step before that is always a sort of encounter with nature or place or experience. And so, a long time ago, I walked across Spain. And so I did I walked 1,000 kilometers, and that journey became the foundation for my graduate work. And since then, I've done a lot of other kinds of journeys that are either walking or traveling through space or swimming or any of those kind of like physical activities. And the relationship between that physical activity, there's a moment where I metabolize that activity through drawing and reading and making maquettes. And once I feel like the work is in my hands, that's when I can do the final drawings and the final glass pieces. And so thinking just about what Simone said about that idea of like falling into the work, there's times when I look at the work, my studio the next day, and I think, who's come in? Like, who did all this work? It wasn't me. Now that I'm a bit older though, I have to work with a timer, and so I can't work in that liminal space. I can't work in that moment of being so present that you lose yourself, because I'm too old, my joints don't like it. So I've had to find a slightly different way of working. But it really is about that act of metabolizing, not only emotionally and physically, but intellectually and spiritually, so that the work comes out. And, I think that idea of the ancestors guiding us, or, that part of your brain that is quiet and makes decisions, like, I think all of that plays a part of it, but it's, for me, it's a process of not being consumed by the work, but being built by the work. And so it's not about losing myself, it's about being present and building myself.
I just finished a research project where I was exploring decolonizing the spirit, and a lot of it was looking at atheists who are engaging in their spirituality in different ways, and a lot of it was nature driven, and that's how I feel when we're talking about this and reflecting on nature as being this significant portion of our creation process. And for me, I think it's the same thing, like it begins with nature, and then also nature helps walk you through it. And I think for me, I've been starting to try to decolonize my art practice, and that is really, really difficult because that means like not adhering to deadlines or things like that. But I feel like all of us are making works that are starting to look towards that, I think.
Can I ask you a quick question? So, like, it's about deadlines.
Yeah.
Because I think time is an illusion. Time is a bit of an illusion, right? Like it's a construct. It's the way that we help organize ourselves. But in that act of decolonizing and thinking about time and deadlines, is it about an act of being able to bring the work into its fullest self, or its fullest beingness or beingness? Okay.
I think that's something that Mia had mentioned when we spoke about like getting the work done to a point that feels like it's really, it has no embodied like exactly what you wanted to do, that critique that you wanted to be saying on its own without you interjecting. Do you feel like it's that same kind of process?
Yeah, I feel like I internalized a lot of the academic process when I went to school at AU Arts as well, where it's how it is, right? Like that's the institution where you have these deadlines, and it is gratifying in a way, right? Because it's like, okay, well, you have to make this project, then when it's over, you can read it's over, you move on. And I think that kind of carries itself into the the art field as well. But I kind of slowly began to unlearn that after I came out of school, to say like that my work, I really kind of admired artists who had an iterative process. Because I work in ceramics, that's difficult, because once the object is fired, it's permanent and exists in the world forever. So I kind of had to come to terms with like, what is an iterative process in ceramics where you can like reuse the work, which it doesn't feel like half-assed assignment that you're turning in from your previous semester. And so I think that like I'm still learning that process, but even more so to just like I look back on work that I've made. I sometimes I just go in the studio and I just make something that feels comforting to me. My work now is a lot about food, and so I started that practice by just going into the studio and saying like, what am I familiar with? I started making like these dumplings in ceramics, because if I was finding comfort in that in my home, then I can find comfort in that in my studio. And I kind of made a lot of food things one year and was like, nothing came out of that, and I kind of just put it in storage. And this year, I feel like because of the pandemic and I don't have a ceramic studio practice right now, I'm opening that box and going like, this work is fully formed now, even though when I put it in the box, it wasn't, and literally nothing. Like, so
yeah, I find that in my own textile practice, this past year kind of changed everything, because I didn't have access to the studio space I did before, and I've been exploring a lot of like paper making, didn't have access to like wet work spaces, and that's kind of what led to just trying something else completely out of the box. And I didn't feel as tied to an outcome. So in a way, it was, it's a bit scary, especially when you've been accustomed to putting a plan, working towards that plan, the plan has been met, and then your rug gets pulled out from under you, like, you're just like, oh, okay, so what's my next steps? And then there's something almost freeing in what comes out of it. Like, do you find that with your stuff as well, Eva?
Yeah, I can agree a lot with like having a plan, getting ready to go, and then like, the pandemic happens and you kind of have to like figure out what you're gonna do. It took me a while to adjust, I think. And I think I felt a lot of like I was kind of scared, I think, when the pandemic happened, in the sense of like, I was worried that I wouldn't like continue to make stuff after, because we also graduated in the middle of the pandemic. So it was like, oh, it's already getting over that hump of like graduating and then figuring out what you want to do after, but then also in the middle of a pandemic when you have no access to a studio or any of the regular things that you do. I feel like I like rushed to find something I could do, and like bought a loom, and I don't know, just like threw myself into it. But still, it felt very like, I don't know, it didn't feel the same way. It took me a while to get in my groove, I think, and like finding something that still inspired me, I guess. I don't know.
Do you think you were trying to find something that would replace that like exact same groove?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's definitely how I was feeling, was like trying to find something that like felt the same as when I was in school, like being able to like access anything at all times, and like work through any kind of project that I wanted to. And then being limited to like an apartment and non-toxic materials and like I don't know, limited space.
I think most of us found ourselves in those like really like small spaces and going, what next? And it's funny because like we mentioned like those safety nets that you kind of try to replace, because now everything is just different. And for a while it was, I can say that for myself, I am grateful and happy and healthy, and a lot of people got like disproportionately affected by the pandemic, and I am lucky to have access to the spaces I could to safely recoup, right? And for me, like I got into doing kumihimo braids, and it wasn't for any kind of consumerist way. It was just really something just very therapeutic. And I know I spoke with Natalie about this. Like, she does some fantastic jewelry with the kumihimo braiding, and she also like looked at that idea of it just being therapy. It wasn't for sale. It wasn't, you know, thinking of what's next, but it was safe. It was, yeah, it was different.
But certainly, you know, I think all of us as makers make.
Yeah.
You know, like we make in the kitchen, we make in the garden. We, you know, we just like the act is in the hands. And I knit. I've been knitting since I was a little kid, and I love knitting. And I found in the pandemic, and actually just before the pandemic, I started something called rage knitting. Where
Yes, tell me more.
Yeah,
I love that.
no, I love rage knitting. I'd come home and I'd just be furious about something. Like I think the pandemic, for me, was really hard emotionally. For a whole bunch of reasons, and I know it's the same for everyone. Like, I'm not saying that I'm unique in any way, shape, or form, but with knitting, I could be so mad, and all you have to do is knit, right? It's all you need to know is how to knit and how to purl, and really all you need to know how to do is knit, because purling is just knitting backwards. And so I was taking that frustration and that anger and that rage, because it was a towering rage, and made something fuzzy and cozy and comfortable with it. And so, you know, I have all these sweaters now that like I can wear them, and they feel a little like a shield of armor, because they keep me warm, they protect me. You know, I love the fact that knitting is just like it's like a straight line, right? Like it's like a drawn line that like the only thing, because I've worked with wool, there's no knots in it. It can't fall apart, and it's still just like a straight line. Like Mackenzie wrote something about it years ago that's changed the way I've been thinking about fiber the last, I think, 20 years. But yeah, so rage knitting for me was really a way to allow me to keep making, to have that moment where like you lose yourself in a physical activity to the point where whatever your brain is hamstering around drops away, because all you need to do is breathe, and all you need to do is knit. And so that's part of my practice, and I don't know why I haven't been able to access that part of my practice, which is incredibly similar to my drawing practice, which you know, is again about meditation and a way of tracking my attention. So my drawings are often it's rooted in mark making, and again, mark making in a very simple way, so that I can see where my attention's been on. I use a very fine brush, I use a pot of ink, and so if I'm not paying attention, I get it. And then the next time I have all of these beautiful little dots that are exactly right, and then there's another. And so, and that's not dissimilar to knitting, right? Because it's the same action. You can see where you're paying attention and where you're not paying attention. You can see where the tension is right, or where the ink has lost control. And so for whatever reason, in the pandemic, it's been almost impossible for me to draw. And so the knitting has been a way for me to metabolize that sort of fear and anger, but also a way for me to think through some of the larger ideas that I've been having about the next body of work. And so I've been doing a lot of walking and picking up rocks and drawing on them and gilding them and polishing them with my little hand tools. So we'll see what comes out of that. But it's, you know, I think without having that moment of liminal space, or that moment of that meditative loss of, you know, the big capital S self, I couldn't have a practice. So,
but I think it's interesting that you kind of bring up this private practice almost, because I get that comment a lot from people who just don't know my career, right? And so they're like, oh my God, it must be so much fun to just do what you love all the time. Which is, you know, I can hear other people laughing, because it's like, my career as an artist is a job.
Yeah,
and
you're a professional.
And so then it's like having that personal practice that I feel like a lot of makers do have, that doesn't intersect with our career, is actually not uncommon. And like that fact that you're knitting, like you're not really sure, but somehow it's permeating a little bit, and I'm like, that's how I am with my cooking as well. And I kind of lost a bit of a sense of identity throughout the pandemic, which is not new to me. It happens a lot in terms of like calling myself an artist. And I wonder, I'll ask that question to the rest of the group, I guess, is like, you know, do you feel like you're having these crises of artistic identity where like it's ingrained in us as makers as well? Like if you're not making something, like, are you really an artist?
Absolutely.
And how, you know, how are you kind of coming to terms with that, or not? Especially the pandemic was like a really big one for me for that one.
Yeah, especially those first few months. There was actually a period where I didn't feel like making anything at all. Making, writing, nothing. It was an odd space because, again, like with ikumi braiding, it took me maybe a couple months after I got back to get into a space of not like over heightened anxiety 24/7, and trying to even draw on something that would have been previously soothing for me. It just wasn't there. So I know a lot of us process things differently, but like was there a period where most of us felt like there was just nothing? Like it's just a loss of anything.
For sure.
Yeah.
I didn't do anything for a few months at all.
And I think that was what Eva and I were in the same class together, and that was what was so difficult, is we were in our graduating last few months, you know, and you have this synchronicity with your routine and with your rigor and creativity, and then suddenly everyone was scrambling to figure out what to do, and not have that connection with our peers anymore. Our instructors were sorting things out, how to reshift things. But for me, I actually kept going.
Yeah.
Like I really found a gentleness in feeling raw and in feeling like you don't know what's next, and just to keep going, and really connecting with what Natalie mentioned with her rage knitting. That's kind of how I approach my loom every day, is that I really give space within my pattern, within the colors that I choose, or what I draw on the loom, is to let the day inform me. So that's why my piece, although it starts off conceptually, it never ends up the way that I plan, because I allow the emotion of any day to fuel whatever goes onto the piece. So you were mentioning how you wear it, and it's this armor of kind of this memory and imbued with your energy, and that's why, for me, that's what it is for my works, and each one of them I just have a focus and an energy within them, and it's really nice to have that gentleness though with yourself, and to feel raw in front of your work.
The gentleness, like sometimes I don't think we afford ourselves enough grace.
No.
Like I had an instructor I was working with last year that she was just so frustrated because she had these articles to be writing and the deadlines were just gone and extended and extended, but there was just nothing there. And I think sometimes we're really hard on ourselves, especially as women in these fields, to just produce all the time, to be productive all the time. Like you don't allow yourself the grace to rest. And I guess kind of that's why I like the idea of the rage knitting, of the walking and finding really cool rocks, of walking and just allowing yourself to be, of sitting at the loom and allowing yourself to be gentle, to not be so hard on yourself. It's hard to do, and it's a lesson I am slowly learning. I'm a bit of an overachiever, and I am trying to work on that. So
We're unlearning these things that kind of come with a lot of the systems that we've also been supported by academia or society. Like it's just, I don't know, it's hard to navigate, I think, but I think that, like you said, like giving yourself space, it's really possible to.
So you mentioned like the institutions that support us, that we come up through, and like pros and cons to everything. So it's not about bashing anything, but in terms of how those work, like some of us have better experiences than others. But coming up through academia, like that more academic sense of craft making, do we find that there is enough support for these kinds of things, enough room to kind of re-envision how we work and how we give ourselves the space? Or do we think that there is a way for us to work towards re-envisioning that?
Yes. Look, I think it's each of our responsibilities to overthrow the system. And deep down inside, I'm a bit of an anarchist who recognizes that working at an institution and living in a society, I have chosen to participate in those structures, right? But there are, because I don't need to give you guys all a lecture about my internal philosophy, but basically as a human being, I have a choice. I have a choice to participate in everything. And, you know, just thinking back to what I'm probably the wrong name now, Sheila said, like, you know, thinking about decolonizing or however you want to describe it, is an act of claiming our adulthood, right? And so in my classroom, and, you know, part of it is that I also have a different experience now, because I've been a professor for 20 years. You know, in my classroom, I don't ever want to have a student, I never want to have a student come into my classroom and feel marginalized because of who they are physically, right? Or genetically, or who they are ethnically, or sexually, or any of those things. That's none of my business. My business, my job is to help them find their voice. My job is to make sure that when I'm talking about artists, I'm talking about it in a global context and a very localized context, so that we can recognize that in the Studio Glass movement, which is the one that I'm part of and an inheritor of, that there have been women who have been in the background who have built the movement and have their contributions have been erased to a certain degree. Like the very first Studio Glass studio in Holland, in Sweden, and that was the first one in Europe, was opened by a woman. And so, you know, no one ever talks about her, but her contribution is what makes it possible for us to work on a small scale. And so I remember at my place of employment when the Indigenous Welcome Center was opened, and there were drums, and I'm gonna try not to cry, but I'm not gonna promise anything. And there was like dancing, and like I had to go into a corner and weep, because I realized that for like years, I allowed myself to be silenced around certain issues. And so I made a commitment to myself and to my students that I was not going to be quiet anymore when I saw a racist or sexist or any of those kinds of things happen, because it's my job to stand up, right?
And we appreciate it so very much, because
I promised myself I would try.
so we appreciate it, because it goes a long way, especially when you're in a space where you don't necessarily want to be silenced, but when you don't have that support, it is really difficult to stand on your principles. Sometimes you have to strategically think, do I just keep quiet, do what I need to do, and not have people with more resources waste my time and bog me down in semantics? Or, you know, so it's always appreciated when you find people in that institution that believe in that can support you, that can help you to not lose your voice, because it affects your work too.
Well, and the thing is that you people are the cutting edge of what's coming, right? Like you guys are helping us see the new road. And so if we are fearful in change, we don't get nowhere, right? And an art school is a messy, dirty, wonderful, horrible, exciting place, because everyone is finding their voice. And like what we're doing is a kind of act of shamanism, right? So we're transmuting thinking and academics and theory and philosophy and material into something that communicates nonverbal. And that is a powerful act. And if you look at the history of Homo sapiens sapiens, you know, there are grave goods that have been put into graves prior to us becoming modern humans. It is part of our DNA. It is a powerful act, and it is one that will overthrow the oppression, right? And it will overthrow the things that we don't need anymore, that are some kind of hang up that are useless. And we're going to talk about.
Oh no, it's fantastic. But
I do feel like there is, like, we don't all just come, you know, fully formed out of this like woke movement as these super empowered creatures who are ready to speak out about injustice like at any moment. And I appreciate you kind of saying like this was the time in which I could make that decision for myself, because we all have to do that, and it's we can't beat ourselves up for, you know, sometimes having to stay in the background to protect ourselves or whatever, you know, the situation is there. And I've been feeling that a lot in my practice. Like, you know, I hate to admit that I'm maybe moving from the emerging artist into maybe not. When does the emerging artist ever end? I don't know, but I found myself in the emerging artist time very just like trying to find my way, following a lot of different advice, and a lot of it was really bad advice. And so then it's, you know, it's like I'm kind of at that point too where I'm saying like, where am I at? Like, what choices can I make for myself or my community that are going to be, you know, these kind of good empowered choices. And I do regret sometimes like not following different paths in certain direction in my practice or the art that I was talking about, but at the same time it's like I can only make a decision in the future now.
You do the best with like what you have in that moment, in that moment where you are. So I try to not dwell on that, like beating yourself up for the thing you couldn't do before. Like you talk about like that space of fear
or being taken advantage of.
Exactly.
You know, it happens.
Yeah.
It just,
especially if there's nothing you could do to control it. Try to not beat yourself up. I mean, that's easier said than done because our brains like to just give us that running track of But even from that space of fear, trying to learn to overcome that, working through that. Like I know a lot of what when Eva and Simone and I had discussed the Threading Back exhibit, what the pieces that we wanted in it, what we wanted it to say. Sometimes these are difficult conversations to have, very difficult things to put out there when they're so personal, when they're so critical of a lot of things that, again, the institution kind of has this going one way, and we're saying, no, we're kind of going against that because that's not our reality. It can be a terrifying thing to put yourself out there like that. But like a lot of the work with even Eva's hair, like she had spoken in depth with me about that, and there was so much of it that I think the three of us were just like, oh God, yeah, it's just hair. Please stop putting your hand in my head. Like we've had just random strangers just come up and you want to say things sometimes, but you can't. Like, so depending on where you are, you find yourself frozen in that moment, and then like 2 days later, you have the fantastic retort. Because 2 days later, so it's like, okay, then maybe 2 days later, but you're still learning. So how do we channel that? And a lot of that came up in your work.
I think like something I've learned is just putting physical space between people. And also that's kind of helped in the pandemic. People are less inclined to like come up to you in general. So I think just like literally moving back is like an easy way to like not have to confront someone, but like, I don't know, like still having agency in your body.
Yeah. So. And I think like one thing that you really developed at school was this notion of microaggressions, right? And you talk about someone reaching out and touching your hair, and then that energy lands on you. Yeah. So then you're wondering what you could have done better. You're wondering what you should have said to stand up for yourself, and then left with this feeling of shame, like you didn't honor yourself,
like,
right?
I feel like it's this experience of being like, well, if I advocate for myself, am I just gonna burn a bridge or avoid a bitch? Like, and then I'm gonna have that feeling as well, and trying to kind of reconcile. Okay, well, which difficult experience do I want to have?
Yeah, like which battle do I pick, and which let's just let it go. And I think for myself, the space, as difficult as it was, having the pandemic happen and being away from the institution, pros and cons to it, there was a bit of mental clarity there that wasn't there before. Again, it's not a generalized thing because I've had great experiences at the school, but I found myself in a space where I didn't have a lot of that external noise. And it's easy to always say I can be bold and I can do this when you have that space. But I guess I kind of wonder sometimes, like the work I'm doing now, would I have felt comfortable making that statement with the work if I didn't have that space for like a year? And I don't know if I'll ever have a full answer for that, but I guess that's something I grappled with as well.
I have a question. Do you think part of it is the discomfort of the pandemic?
A part of it is definitely that. When the pandemic happened, I just had a full-blown just panic episode. I just didn't want to be around people. And a part of it was a few experiences that I had where I didn't feel comfortable saying the thing that I knew I wanted to say. So I spent a lot of time waffling about how do I do this work. So after I was able to like not have an anxiety episode about stepping outside my front door, it was a bit of mental clarity. Like the voices that I respected that I wanted to hear from, I could still hear from, but I had space to not have to worry about the microaggressions, not have to worry too much about saying what it is that I needed, I felt I needed to say in my work. Yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes we have to speak about our work. That's not just like look at my art and get everything that I intended out of it. And I find that difficult. Sometimes I make work about my family, and I become super anxious about putting that out there to my family. And going, I'm critical of you. How are you going to take that? And so, yeah, I think when you kind of can sit with your work by yourself, maybe sometimes you can see those ideas grow and articulate them yourself.
I also think there's a possibility, and I'm going to use a term that comes from something completely different, but a level of code switching that can happen. Like, you know, my work is profoundly personal. Like, it's about my experience of the divine in the world. And when you tell people that, they're like, thank you, Natalie, but I got it. And
That's
so
your thing.
Yeah. So you know, when you're making work that is about your experience with something larger than yourself, it's profoundly personal, and I don't tell many people really what the work is about. I'm able to speak about it academically around things like liminality, like pilgrimage, like transformative experience, and those kinds of things. And then I'm also able to speak about it sort of in the vernacular, right? I can talk about it without ever actually saying what it's about. Thank you, art school. And so I always think like and this is why, you know, when I was talking earlier about the classroom, like I think the work, being an artist is a really hard thing. It's not easy. It's not for the weak. It's a job. It is something that you commit your body and your time to. It's your job and your hobby. It consumes us, so that on the weekends we come to talks like this, or we go to exhibitions, and so there is something at the core of all of our practices that drives it. This deep, profound curiosity that I think is very human. What's over the next hill? Anyway, so I think there's like a secret heart to everyone's work. And that secret heart doesn't have to be shown. And I think the challenge with art school is we're always asking you what it is. That's part of the training. And so once you leave art school, it took me a while to be able to articulate my work in a way that I felt comfortable talking about in public. You know, I have a whole series of work that was, my grandmother died, it was 10 years after she died. I adored her. She had these great hands. And so like, you know, whenever she would touch me, I felt like I was, like as a little kid, I felt like I was with someone else, and there was someone else in the universe with me. And so that whole body of work I can talk about in terms of mathematics and in terms of my grandma, and that grandma part never comes out. And so I think the secret heart is really important to recognize for ourselves, but it's not really always important to say it out loud, because then you have to go into all the long details.
Yeah, and I think like art is inherently political, social, everything we make has almost an intended viewer. So obviously there's a relationship between the public with our work. But I really appreciate you saying that. I almost giving permission, so thank you, Natalie. It's like, a lot of my work is super personal too, and it's like, you know, finding that way of how can it relate to other people, but I don't have to share everything about it, or they don't have to know everything about me to get it.
Because they bring their own lens and their own experience.
Yeah.
And I think if it's like, for me, if it's all about me and my experience and what I want the viewer to get, I often think that then is therapy, and I'm not interested with a therapist for that, right? Like, I don't need to, and I was thinking about what you said earlier about, you know, decolonizing and gardening, and you know, just thinking about like there's a time where you have to fallow the fields. We just have to rest, and I think, you know, just going back to not needing to be busy all the time. I think it comes from two things. I think it's our time now where everyone needs to be busy to be valued. And the other thing is because we're women, right? And so there's a point where that socialization, you know, that you don't want to say something rude to someone else when they're touching your hair, and that's what, like, that moment with the drums and the dancing, like, for me, that was that moment. I'm like, I am putting aside my socialization as a woman. I am not gonna like try and sugarcoat it. I'm not gonna try and make the person feel better about it. I think there's a way that you can resist or push back or make sure that they see the boundary that they're not going to cross in a way that's understandable to someone else, right? Because their challenges, they just simply don't know that they're acting poorly. They simply don't understand that if they keep asking you like what the best Indian restaurant is in town.
Oh, geez.
You know, like, I'm like, my family comes from Goa. It's like 80 square kilometers, and there's no Goan restaurants in Calgary, so don't ask me. I'm my favorite dosa place, I can tell you that. But like, you know, as an Indian person and as someone who constantly gets asked about Indian culture, I'm like, there's a billion of us. And like, you know, what we understand as Hinduism is really a colonial construct. Like the British built it, so it was easier, you know, like Hinduism as a practice was really regionalized. And there's like thousands of different castes because it's all based in where you come from. And so, you know, there's this almost an antithesis or like maybe a magnetic sort of, I don't know how to describe it. So where we as people who've been trained in a Western way of thinking want to reduce everything and abstract everything so we can understand it. This fits into this category, this fits into that category, when really everything is so complex and messy.
Yeah, so like even just following up on that, like, so when this is your work and you're trying to juggle how much of it do I say, you know, what language do I use to describe it depending on who I'm describing it to, how are you developing like your professional practice with getting your work out there, with getting people to understand it, to pick up the work, to show the work, to sell your work, to, you know, publish your writing? Like it becomes, I don't want to say death trap because it sounds so pessimistic, but it's a very difficult, and I'm still just learning, but it feels daunting sometimes. And I guess I'm just curious about the different ways that we're kind of all paving very individual paths to this, because you realize, okay, what's there right now, that's not working for me, but then how do I circumvent that and try to use it to my advantage? How would you, Simone looks like she has ideas.
Oh, goodness. I mean, it's hard, right? To put yourself out there. It's quite a vulnerable state to be in. But for me, it's just being passionate and confident in the storytelling and the narratives that I want to portray in my textiles. And there's a kinship there. And for me, I mean, social media has played a pretty valuable role for me to put my work out there, especially in the pandemic, to share my process, to share my work. And there's that sense of immediacy, like on a global level, when you can connect with others, whether it's through the fiber hashtags or the Canadian contemporary art hashtags or whatever. But I think what it really just comes down to is believing in your own craft, right? And yeah, putting it out there, in whatever means.
Yeah, the immediacy of social media is definitely, like, in this past year, you realize how quickly you can connect with people that, like, there are a few artists online, like I've known of online, that I love their work, would have never connected with them outside of that, and I've had, you know, some very embarrassing fan moments, but they took it in stride. I'm like, thank you. And you connect with these people and you just have the most comfortable conversation sometimes. It feels like it kind of squashes that barrier that you're kind of told, or you kind of ingrained to believe that there's only one way to go about making these kinds of connections. And it helps sometimes, at least for me, to see people as people and not just like as these titles and like this is this famous person with their work. It doesn't detract from me loving their work, because again, very embarrassing fan moments, like, but you're a bit dissuaded sometimes from how you go about networking.
Yes, and don't get me wrong, there's definitely a source of anxiety too with that, you know, that Instagram and social platforms. It's a facade at times, and it really is important for me to step away from it and be able to ground myself and to have those boundaries for yourself with those kind of platforms.
Yeah, I think for me, it's like, you know, how do you navigate all these professional opportunities where, on one hand, we're in this moment of kind of social change. Social change is not quite the right word. It's like people are changing their views on how the system should be. Systemic change, I suppose. And then, like, professionalism. How do you, what is professionalism?
Yes.
When women can advocate for themselves and don't just have to be quiet all the time and say yes, like that's an interesting place to be in. And I think, like, I'm giving out advice to anyone, it's that you have to kind of pick the opportunities and institutions that really resonate with you, and then hopefully one day, like, creating these communities yourself. Because that's one of the mistakes I made, was I had this idea of top craft institutions, people, whatever, that I would see up there being like, okay, well, that's it, right? If I, one in particular for ceramics, like if I'm gonna be an emerging artist picked by them or exhibit with them, then that's it. And then, as I kind of grow into my practice and realize who I am, what kind of artist I am, I realize, no, that's actually not for me. Those aren't the people I really want to hang out with. But it's like, and so finding these kind of newer avenues has been really beneficial for me, especially during the pandemic. Like I said, I'm not doing ceramics particularly right now. I'm totally okay with that, because like I've published a few creative and journalistic works in the last year through publications that are very obviously about kind of uplifting marginalized voices. And that really resonated with me. That said, like, my experience that I always felt was really weird and nobody could relate to, somebody out there might actually relate to it, and through this institution or publication or whatever, like, it's going to reach them. So, I used to apply to a lot of things, and now I just try to just pick the things that I really feel
really
like
want to
represent me and my values. Yeah.
There's this idea of community that comes up when we talk about the things that we gravitate towards. And I think it's so important sometimes, especially if you can, because not all of us will have the space or the resources to make those inroads. But if you can, once you're in a space, encourage that space to bring in and broaden that community, because it never hurts to have, at least my thoughts on it, never hurts to have additional voices, new voices. You'll always be in one particular space if you always have the same set of voices. And it can be tricky. I attended a talk a few months ago. Oh, time is such a weird thing right now. Recently. And one of the curators said was that it's, especially like as a Black woman in a curator space, it's very difficult to not get into a space and be tokenized or feel tokenized. It's hard to avoid that. But what do you make of that space? What do you do once you get in there? And one of the things that she was just adamant about was that once she got her foot in the door, she was dragging people in there with her. And I loved it so much. She's just very adamant about that. I love it because you get this, you learn from people. I love talking to people about their work, about things that, again, inspire them. This is why this happened, because and it's hard to do that when it's just the same people around all the time. And yeah, I guess that sense of community for me is something that's important. So it's good to hear when you're selective about doing something that means something and not just getting into the space because of the prestige behind it or because of a particular thing that you should be doing, but because it's important to you.
Because you might, like, for me, it's always set myself up for a negative experience when I had these high expectations for an institution that I thought was it. And then, I realized, like, very quickly that, like, the values didn't necessarily always align with mine.
Values are, institutions are just run by people, and people are fallible, and no matter how hard they try, we all fail, right? Because we're just people. And so, I have a slightly different experience because I'm further on in my career, and I have a job that I adore, and I have a kind of privilege and freedom that is unusual. And so, you know, I do get to chase down what I want to make, or what I shouldn't say what I want to make, but what I feel like I'm called to make. But part of it also means that I have the privilege to serve on boards. And so I've always felt a good degree or need or a calling to participate in community building in a variety of ways. And I think that's what makes craft so powerful in all of its shapes, because we all work together, we all share information. It's not something that we do in silence in a basement room. Well, sometimes we do, but sometimes. But we're part of a larger community, and we activate that community, and we're part of that community. And so, you know, I've served on several boards, and still am on several boards, including the Alberta Craft Council board. And that's one of the things that I think is really important for all of us to do, is to remember that our practice is a part, or maybe I shouldn't say it that way. I think for myself, part of my practice is service.
Yes.
And that service allows me, again, to in some cases undermine, or in some cases subvert, or in some cases completely upend, so that we can make a space where all of us can make work, because all of us as a community, our voices are important, and it's not just one kind of voice that's important. And I will also say that over the course of my career, I've realized that no matter what I'm working on, it's part of my practice. So if I'm in my garden, it's part of my practice. If I'm in the kitchen, it's part of my practice. If I'm knitting, it's part of my practice. Because the things that I'm drawn to when I'm working with glass, which is a kind of physicality, there's a kind of dance involved with it, right? Like I used to do ballet when I was younger, and there's a sort of gracefulness and a muscle control that's required in the hot shop, at the lathe, in the mold room. All of that is about my body and moving through space. And so so when you don't have access to a play studio, or you don't have access to a printing bed, or you don't have access to kilns, that doesn't mean your practice is over. It just means that you have to try something else. It's like when you have that perfect piece in your head and you make it and you realize that gravity is real and it never exists. And so it's that same sort of tension between what you hope your practice is and what it can be in the real world. And so, you know, practice is a fluid and complicated thing that isn't just rooted in one material or one methodology. It's like, it's, you know, it's everything you do.
Yeah. I guess I'll throw this out to May and Eva, like that idea of that practice being everything that you do. Like I know you got into walking last year, like some very, very long walks, but you felt so happy talking about them. And I know it was inspiring a lot of how you were thinking of changing like your practice. I know for Eva, like a lot of the things that you've been trying have just been different because of different experiences you've had, just kind of allowing yourself to be. Like, how do you think that has developed and will continue to kind of grow?
For me, I think it's difficult because I still am navigating how to, I guess, assert my voice in the same way that some of you have been talking about. So I feel like I'm still trying to, and this could be because I'm not graduated yet, but I'm still trying to like fit in the parameters to, or I guess I haven't had the confidence to step out and be like, well, this is my practice, this is my process, and it might not fit in these boxes, but it's cathartic to me or whatever. Yeah, I kind of lost the question.
But you have to do those things to learn from them as well. It's only so much.
Oh yeah, because as you're saying with like the board and yeah.
Okay. He sits on the board with me.
Maybe talk about that. Yeah, but I guess as you're all speaking, I'm thinking like about the arts week and like, oh, there's these frustrations. Like to me, I feel like if we're decolonizing things like that, then I should be able to just speak however I want about my work, and then. But again, I'm like, oh, maybe that's because I'm still not graduated.
No, but I think being able to speak how you want about your work is really important. And I think, you know, art speak, which is, you know, a disciplinary form of language, isn't necessary in every moment. And, you know, I think if you can speak plainly about your work, you know what your work's about.
But you're only in the now. Like, you know, you only have your experiences that you've had up until this point too. Like I get in that loop a lot where I'm like, you know, I can't talk about this because I'm not a fully fledged artist yet or whatever, but it's like, yeah, you'll always look back at your past work and be like, so embarrassed, or whatever, right? And so, yeah, you can kind of just be in it, like, this is what I know.
And I find that confidence, you develop it.
Yeah.
It's like seeing that fear and just kind of running through it anyway. And you have to, because you owe that. I feel I owe it to myself to do the work justice. So even if I'm terrified, my work is at times very uncomfortable, but it means a lot to me. So even if it means to talk to myself and have like these very detailed conversations and ignore the strangers that are watching me talk to myself as I power through this, I'm gonna do it because I find it's important. And each time you do that, you end up having to do it less and less. I mean, I still have my thesis defense in August. Confidence, it comes and goes, but we're trying because the work means something. So like I know a lot of your jewelry work channels a lot of those things of space and placement that mean things to you. So we keep going.
I guess what I mean is conceptually, I recognize all these parameters, I haven't experienced them, like of the art world, of like high art, low art, or whatever. And to me, part of decolonizing is like questioning why that is there in the first place and if it has value.
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't get to that question before I'm like, oh God, now I have to decide whether or not I'm going to like push this boundary or whether or not I'm gonna stay within it.
Yeah.
And
Great thing is you've got a lot of time to play with those things. And I think, you know, if I think about your work and your practice and the way that you've approached those things, there's a generosity towards the work that is really inspiring. And like so the place that makes decisions in your brain is nonverbal. And so you can feel that something is the right choice, but it takes a lot of experience to be able to say why it's the right choice. And the only way you can get to that point is just by making as much as you can and lying about your work as much as you can. Because you know that process of storytelling allows you to think, okay, well, maybe that is true, or maybe that isn't true, you know, like I used to be so terrified of public speaking that I burst into tears every time. I know it seems like I did it today, but that was just because I was emotional. I think we are all wrapped up within that notion of perfection, or that notion of authority and authenticity, that we forget that, again, it's back to that idea between the abstraction and the complexity, that what we're doing is incredibly complex, and you can tell a story about the work or lie about it. And then through that process of telling that story, you actually come to understand your work better.
Yes.
And every time you sort of translate between material and words and writing, you get a better understanding of what the work is and where the boundary needs to be pushed and where the boundary needs to be blown apart.
Do you find that for yourself, that with each like iteration of this thing, because it's a series of it that you were looking at exploring here in different formats and what that means for like your womanhood. Like I know sometimes you're uncomfortable about how you're going to say certain things. Did you find that it got less uncomfortable talking about it?
I feel like I don't have to explain myself as much anymore, but I think that's because I'm not in school anymore. But I also kind of choose not to sometimes now. If I'm writing an artist statement, I kind of just explain what I want, and like also I don't necessarily do it as academically anymore. A lot more just like, this is what I was feeling, so I just write it out, and I don't necessarily like worry about like how it might sound to, I don't know, like a gallery or something like that. Like if it's like what I was thinking about, then I just like let it be, kind of. So
lie and omit. I will. I will focus on that. Okay, on a lighter note, sort of. I guess this question I had in my head when I was thinking about. So we went to the Kyoka Way Art Sculpture Park yesterday, and I was just like, I was almost brought to tears. And this idea popped into my head that I'd never thought of before in my entire life, of doing outdoor artwork. Never. That had never been a thought for me. And I kept on thinking of this question of what would be your dream project? Not tied to money, not tied to an institution, just a body of work that you'd want to make. What would that look like for you?
Well, I'm just gonna throw that out to the universe. But I'm a really good cook, and if anyone wants to learn how to cook the things I know how to learn, or I know, then I would love that for that to be art in some way.
Nice. Yes.
I've always dreamed of that, just doing food workshops in an arts context, and a mural, because I'm doing ceramics, and that's like a really obvious one. Tile work, but that's a big
Tiles have always interested me, but I don't do ceramics. I'm just like, strong learning curve again. But yeah, that sounds good. Food, murals.
Yeah,
Yeah, we got the eyes.
I think I really resonate with Katie Owie because I like sculptures with movement is really fascinating, and I really like public art too because I think I want the art world and the non-art world to be more integrated. So probably something big and moving.
How's that? Do you find a difficult intersection between kind of this macro jewelry? I'm sure it's a conscious general, that's macro jewelry with like big art sculptures, or is there like an intersection you see there that what they have in your practice?
Well, I've never really boxed myself into the micro jewelry box, so I'm a little bit free there. But to me, jewelry is mostly about this tactile relationship with the material, like putting something together in some kind of way. So I feel like that will work the same whether, I mean, I don't think it'll work the same. I know that there's other things at play, but I think the desire works the same, as small as it doesn't fit.
So like small pieces in that sculpture park?
Oh no, I want it to be big.
Massive, okay.
Jewelry for
Nice.
the land.
Nice.
Yeah.
Wow, cool. Yes. We like.
You know, total cheese factor, but I feel like I'm living my dream project right now. I'm like, I don't know, I just feel so grateful to have my studio in my home and wake up and be creating, and in the last year I've been, my work has been garnered by international museums, and to just really do that has just been so special and such a gift. And I mean, for me, technically, my relationship with my tools, I'm still emerging and building that relationship. So I guess the dream would be just to go bigger. Like I always just want more detail, bigger. So that dream studio, to have that huge loom, and it's just, life is good. How about you?
I don't know if I have a specific like making thing that I'm interested in as a dream project, but since I'm kind of exploring the realm of like curation right now, I guess I'm interested in what I can do with that, and like there are some like projects I'm working on right now, which you will all see hopefully soon. So I think just exploring that more is kind of just a dream of mine right now.
So top curator, Eva birhanu.
I don't know about that.
We're gonna put it in the universe, put it out there. Natalie, what about you?
I want to make addressing scale and glass is a difficult thing, mostly because it's the material takes a certain degree of control when you're fooling it. So I want to make a really big glass thing. Really
So
big.
like this.
No, like massive.
No, back to having been at KDO's and thinking about like the sculpture park and the work that's on there.
Was there any glass?
No. But Katie has this piece that she did in art school where there's a piece of glass in it, and there's a way of like texturing glass. It's an old school thing called glue chipping, where you put glue on the glass, and as it cools, it pulls glass off, and it looks like a snowflake pattern.
Ooh,
I'm sure you've all seen it in bathrooms.
Probably.
Like the way she used it, I was like, oh my god, she is a genius, like for so many ways. But in her studio was a giant water tank. I know.
Yeah.
The water tank was like, oh my god, that's the scale that I want to work at. But of course, that would be nearly impossible to move physically, and
Well, you'll have help. You'll
Yeah,
have.
that's
Do you
right.
see the
Yeah.
other sculptures there? They got
Yeah.
there. So.
that's true. That's true. And Michael Heiser moved that big giant rock.
Oh man,
down the
that's
road.
massive. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I do want to address scale because there's something about a volume of light that is deeply moving for me.
Nice.
And it's like, what does that look like for women craft artists to admit that like I can make a big bold thing too
Yeah.
is pretty new still.
Yeah. Well, as someone who makes work about silence, you know, to say that I want to make a big giant FU piece of glass, like, it just also cracks me up. And I want it to be about silence and stillness. And so I want people to walk into the room and be frozen in space and fall into an internal dialogue.
Yes.
And so, I think that
Like
scale.
you were with the water tank.
Yeah, like I was with the water tank.
Yep.
Silent and awe.
Right.
What about you?
Me? Well, it's weird because I'm still learning a lot of the intricacies of the 3D printing process, but a lot of what I've been doing now is incorporating free motion embroidery in 3D printing. I've just really been thinking about these just spherical shapes, just things that integrate the two pieces seamlessly. So if I'm running my hand over the sort of like an embossed, engraved process of the threads being incorporated in it. But it's difficult to do with just the printer, the 3D printer, because it's a hot extrusion process.
Yeah.
So it's just ways of kind of, I don't know, it sounds like a very random abstract thing too, but I've just been very interested in trying to see that come to life, but something sculptural in an outdoor art space. And it's not, again, these are things that I've just really been delving into in maybe the past year and yesterday. So it would be interesting to kind of see where that goes, kind of keep that dream in the back of my head. Just pull on it every now and then. Yeah.
Manifested.
Indeed. We put these dreams into the universe. So gigantic FU glass. Yep. Gigantic
I
jewelry.
would name it something different.
Oh, I would absolutely love to see that be the name. Gigantic jewelry. Like, oh yes, we love to see it. Alrighty. I think we're gonna open up to our guests on site and our guests on Zoom to Q&A and to our questions and answers. And again, thank you all so much. This has been so great. I'll take our first question from our on site, if anybody has questions, and then we'll flip it to Anna to field us some questions online. If anyone has a question. Yeah, no problem. No questions? Right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If nobody else has a question.
No, shoot.
I've been dying to know, Simone, because you talk about kind of, you know, you're making work about kind of the Black female experience. Is that your intended audience? And the more I kind of delve into my own work that's about kind of my cultural experience, I guess, in the world, I realize that my work's not gonna speak to a lot of people. I don't really care if you've never had barbecue pork, then you're not gonna get my work. So what's that like for you in your work and your experience?
Yeah, thanks. I feel like initially it was for me, you know, it was as a mixed race woman, it was always like a search of belonging and seeking out my own identity and connecting with my heritage and my ancestry. And from there, like just to really connect with the Black community and to really have, you know, that sense of sisterhood, creating these tapestries of the Black female experience, like you said, and to highlight narratives of joy and resiliency and to really lift up Black women. And I mean, it's for everyone. The stories that I tell and that I share, it's for everyone. But for me, it's absolutely important for me to connect with the Black community and to consider my work being seen by young girls of color and to see themselves reflected in some way within that piece, you know, dare to dream, dare to be you and to be seen. I think that's what's so important about especially being a woman of color, is just dare to be seen and to share your experiences and to use your voice. And so I just think that me really honing in on these narratives is for everybody. I mean, but it is very much intended for the Black community and for people of color.
Fantastic. Alrighty. Have any questions? Okay. All right. Well, oh, we have a question.
Well, I don't want to open a can of fish.
Oh, please do. Please do.
So I'm really, each of you spoke well and in different ways about your education experience, what you had kind of coming up and what you experienced, coming out of school. I'm curious. This may be a bit of a dreamy kind of thing to ask, but I'm wondering if you could pinpoint one or two things that you wish the women of color coming up behind you in that post-secondary institution, which needs decolonization, like as May is talking about, which needs different models to address, students with children, students of all kinds of different experiences. What do you wish was there already for those?
So the kinds of supports.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Indigenous creators that are actively creating professionally, like that's, especially in AU Arts, there's
You have faculty.
faculty. Yeah. Oh, I just wish that the admin would get sensitive.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, no, you're not wrong. Like it takes a lot of work, but it also takes them seeing the importance in getting the external consultants that can come in and just undertake that work, because it is going to be a large job. But having Indigenous faculty, a conscious move to invite Indigenous faculty. I know OCAD did it with their Indigenous faculty hire, they did it with their Black faculty hire, and the cluster hiring, right? And the feedback from the students has been just heart-wrenching, that the difference in sometimes in the small things of just seeing yourself reflected in somebody in a position of power in this place, it means a lot. And well, in addition to faculty and sensitivity training for admin, a large part of it is going to be resources once you get those students in, because there's one part of it with getting the students to come in, but when they get there, what are they being subjected to? Like you mentioned, students that have children, for example, right? What kind of accommodations can be put in place, and not one where you have to go and beg for a very simple, but like having a system in place where you can have a more sort of part-time way of working around things, support for childcare, like simple things like that. Students that come in internationally, for example, that don't necessarily have a community here where they feel comfortable, what kind of outreach supports are in place for them, the funding behind that, because all of these things take money. It's a big job, but I think the institution has to want to do it and to want to throw their weight behind it.
And not just the institution, governments as well.
Yes.
Governments are supporting
the government deals with our institutions in Canada, so that's been fantastic. But those kind of supports I think would be crucial.
I feel like one piece of advice I have for the students, especially women of color themselves, is to not lose themselves when they come into the curriculum. It's you kind of, when you start in first year, you think of yourself as a blank slate or a clean canvas to have all the influences from your instructors and from the institution, which isn't true. I feel like you have a lot to give, your culture, your heritage, things that you're inspired by, and don't lose yourself within your studies. It's just like what Natalie was saying, they're human beings running these institutions, and they are fallible, and you have a lot to bring. That's why you're there. You have a lot to bring to it as well.
I feel like I'd also just say, I'd echo, first of all, everything that everyone else has said, but also allowing students of color to create what they want to create, and not, giving them extra props for like, oh, you're making this about your specific racial identity. This must be way better than like the work you were making before. That was like not necessarily about that. I think encouraging anyone to just make like the work that they actually want to make, and it might very well be that, but like
but like to not expect that.
Not expect that because that's how they present.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's definitely something that I know a lot of people at like post-secondary experience. I mean, me included. So it's just, that's something I would just give out advice to.
I don't know, I'm not a student, and I'm actually a faculty member, but I think one of the things that is incredibly difficult is to support students in that action, because I think encouraging students to make work about their Chinese heritage because they're Chinese, or work about their African heritage because they're African, is actually racist.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I have a student, or had a student once who did work about the landscape, comes from an Asian background, and people were telling them to make work in that tradition. And I'm like, you like country music?
Right? Like,
oh man. you grew up in Alberta. Like, put your cowboy boots, go on to the field and do the work that you need to do. Because the thing is that making work, decolonizing work, making work, I'm sorry, pointing to you, but this is because you said it. And so, making work that is upending that sort of colonial paradigm is about also making work, thinking about post-colonial language as well, right? Using the tools of the colonizer, the vocabulary of the colonizers to upend those kinds of things. Yeah. Like there's so many great examples of that, but our job isn't to force students to make work that we think they should make. It's not my work. There's enough Natalie Rodriguez's in the world. There's even another one in my community. Seriously? Yeah. Like whenever I go get my drugs at the drugstore, I have to like say what address because I don't want to get hers. Anyway, so like, and then the other thing that I just want to reassure everyone is that we are going through an EDI process at the college. And that there has been there's been a really, there's an announcement that's going to come out, but there is a firm that's coming in that I was part of the process, a lot of excitement about them coming in. I feel like it's, if I've seen, when I looked at the work that they did at other institutions, they did a really fantastic job. And so it is step one, like all of these things, like it's always a process, it takes a volume of time, but if we're all willing and able to do the work, it will go faster. And so, any institution is made up of policies and procedures and people, and so that's a really complex ecology to shift, and it is something that we have to do. And I know as a member of faculty and as the president of the Faculty Association, I'm completely committed to pushing that as hard as I can. And so, what I think is wonderful about art school is that we are, it's a flexible space, right? And that we're all committed to change in one way or the other. And so I just have to thank you all for what you did as students, right? All of you did some really significant things that made me, as a faculty member, a little bit weepy and excited. And so I know that as we go through this process, it's going to be painful, as it always is, but it's going to be amazing. Yeah. So carry on doing what you're doing because it helps us.
Yes, my claim to fame is organizing an Excel workshop for artists.
That was amazing though. That was a big deal. Anyway.
So there's a couple questions from online. So first one comes from Stephanie Pollard, and I'm sorry if I stuttered her name. It says, where is everyone finding their inspiration lately? And how is it influencing upcoming projects? So I don't know if that's start.
I feel like my answer might just be very routine. I'm currently in my thesis process and my work is just trying to finish it so I can have work to show. But I think the inspiration for me has been conceptual and trying to ensure, not in the perfectionist sense, but trying to ensure that these objects that I'm looking at making evoke something that I wanted to. And sometimes it can be a hit or a miss. And in doing that, it's really for me about texture. A lot of play on texture and form and it's sometimes just very abstract. For example, last year when I was at my mother's place and I was making one particular piece of work, the thing that inspired the shape of the work was the length and shape of my mother's hallway. Yeah, so it was just a case of like laying out these like patchwork stuff, and wherever the dimensions of the hallway stopped, that's where I stopped. And it was just building form and building this path. I go for walks, and the sidewalk kind of also inspires like this idea of a path. I'm looking at texture and I see like tree barks, and it's a very random thing sometimes as I try to kind of keep myself open to inspiration, because you can sometimes get very sort of pinholed into what that thing is supposed to look like. So for me, that's kind of where inspiration has been coming from lately.
Yeah, I can go next. I think for my work right now, I've been kind of in a slump for a few months, but I'm like getting back into it, and I feel like my current work is kind of stemming from a lot of anger and being mad about performative allyship, particularly. Like that's something that's like really making me like so mad right now. So I think a lot of it's like venting, and also reminding myself to not be super vulnerable for the audience, I think has been something I've been working through, and like not always like giving all of myself up to the audience and like just allowing it to the work to speak for itself, so that I'm not like, you know, like letting my full shield down. So
I am inspired every day. I mean, I have a theater background. I have a whole career in theater, so really storytelling and being influenced by, you know, conversations like this and whatever I'm reading or listening to, or a piece of music that I'm inspired by. I feel like my inspiration is endless, you know, and it usually starts with an emblem or a tableau or a gaze from the portrait that I have in mind, and then it kind of stems from there. But very much just you know, putting my energy out there and seeing what comes back.
What is inspiring me these days is almost the opposite to you, Eva. Is I'm trying to be more vulnerable. I feel like my ceramic work is a lot very clean and reserved. Trying to kind of through the school years, Kenzie, to answer your question as well, is like I just tried to be this mature version of myself, this adult version, dealing with like the things I thought I was interested in, or kind of these mature concepts that I realized like now is a good time for me to kind of reflect on my childhood self. That's why I picked that picture for our little bios, was like realizing that like not much has changed, and that, you know, the childhood me is still me, and I have a lot to learn from that person. So that's that.
I have taken a lot of solace and inspiration from my friends and swimming in the wild. Jumping into the river is an amazing thing.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and so, you know, after having been alone in my house for 18 months, it's been really nice to be able to meet up with people again and spend time with them and realize how freaking lucky I am to have the people that I have in my life. So it's, yeah, and then reading. I read a lot.
I am a true student of Charles Brain, and in my mind, I'm thinking, how can I maximize efficiencies?
Yes.
So I feel like there's a lot to dig in with the decolonization thing. Like there's a lot of work to be done socially, but also there's so much art that can be made through that. And I'm really still riding out this spiritual kick from the research program I was in. And I, like in the Cree belief system, spirit is a part of our human, our humanness, or living. So I really want to explore more. Like I'm inspired by that, and I really want to push this idea in other visual ways of having people engage with their own spirituality.
Yes.
Thank you.
So there's another question. To all the panelists, what are your cultural backgrounds? And how is that juxtaposed with your passions and your choices?
I might go first if that's okay.
Yeah.
So my mother's
So that was
German.
from Tiffany Bryant.
Yeah. I could answer by saying that's the question of where are you from? And I get that question a lot. Where are you from? And so where I'm from is I was born in Africa. My first language was Swahili. My mother's German. My father's East Indian. My last name is Rodriguez, and I grew up in Edmonton. That's who I am.
Nice. For me, it's weird. Like I was born in Jamaica. I moved to Toronto when I was 18, going on 19. I remember that because the bank teller was like, "Yeah, you can finally drink." It's like, okay. I had my first drink at 3, but thank you. Ooh, sorry. Does my cultural background, I think my cultural background definitely influences the work I'm doing right now. It doesn't always, because sometimes it's about just very abstract things. I could be inspired by colors. I could be abstracted by the mosques. I could be abstracted, that sentence. I could be inspired by mosques or just random abstract things. So it doesn't always bear in the things I make, because like now we're talking about like that dream thing. I'm looking at putting random black spheres in a forest. That doesn't necessarily have a specific cultural context, but my thesis work right now is very much that, but it's a very project specific association. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that my cultural background doesn't always lead the work that I am inspired to do, but right now it is.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. We have another question.
Throw in the other question. Okay. Being in systems built on colonial and white supremacist ideologies, what made or makes you stay within those systems?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Being in systems built on colonial and white supremacist ideologies, what made or makes you stay within those systems? To then also do the work of undoing all these things is great, because there's
So if we're like working within this colonialist system,
Yeah.
why do I
Why
choose
you
to
continue
remain in
working
it? I don't know if I have an answer for how to divest from that completely. That's like the world. Not sure I can just dip out. Like if I could, would have been gone long time ago. But there is just
system, and we're
that's a
just
system.
one
We're in
person.
it, right?
You're
So
just
like
one person.
I don't know if like even if it's like a collective of it, that's the system that we're in. And I don't know if I have an interest in lying to myself about what is like that's reality. But what can I do in that that is true to me? Like right now, a lot of my work is critiquing that, and I will gladly do that. Like it's again sometimes daunting because critiquing the system from within the system can have not great feedback. But what else am I going to do? You know, like
What else am I
what else am I gonna do?
I think you can resist in ways that you want to. Like, there's ways to resist, but you can't like just be like, I'm not a part of this system, because we all are.
Yeah, and
I mean, then you'd have to fully live off like the grid and like.
I'm too broke for that, and I have
can't do
no
that.
like outdoor skills. Like
yeah. And for me, like if we're gonna be a part of the system, then why not have women of color rising up within the system to then,
or changing it,
change
you
it
know,
and,
just
and
Donning
make a
sheep's clothing and
difference.
becoming fat.
right. Oh.
Yeah, I think for me, none of my family has been in post-secondary or graduated from post-secondary. So even though it's something that myself, I'm highly critical of, I'm still going through it because I think that will bring pride to my family. Like my family will feel good with that. So even if it's something that I'm navigating how I want to participate in, it's still, yeah, it's still part of the system.
Oh yeah, I gotta show you this video. Reminds me of that. For me, I think it's patience. Like I kind of get into this loop where I butt up against the system, not, you know, maybe it's the colonial white supremacist system, but I am just naturally a person who is struggles with authority. And so, yeah, like I'll butt up against it. I'll feel like no one's listening to me, or, you know, this thing that I did, just the outcome was traumatic. But I can have the patience to kind of reflect on it later. And it takes time, I think, to navigate this world now and to like learn what actions you have in the past are going to affect you in the future in a positive way as well. You know, I've had lots of moments where I've kind of called somebody out and just felt like so like the worst about it, because I felt, you know, like, okay, now I'm just this one person who's saying this like thing that nobody wants to hear. But I've been pleasantly surprised, even through being invited to be on this panel, and in some ways where it's like sometimes the things I've said have stuck and it's taken a little bit of time, but that's good. It's still good that it's happening in you know, my little voice like hasn't just fallen on deaf ears. So that for me is something I'm learning to appreciate.
I think that's another part of it. Actually, no, I forgot.
Well, I also think that, like, you know, things like white supremacy, colonialism, and capitalism are seen as a monolith, right? And they're not. You know, it ebbs and tides, like it ebbs and flows. And so, you know, I can remember as a child growing up in Alberta and there being cross-burning barbecues on the reg, right? And reported on the news. And those things aren't as prevalent. I mean, there's other ways that white supremacy is showing itself these days, but you know, if you consider what was considered white before the 80s, you know, Italians wouldn't have been part of that. Yeah. And so our understanding of these kind of monolithic ideas shifts. They're cultural. They're not endemic. They don't need to be the only way we see the world. We have a choice of how we interact with the world and how we see the world. I need a job. I need to pay my bills. Nothing is for free. And so my choice is how I interact with those systems. Do I simply agree with everything? Do I make sure that my students are just cookie cutters of each other? Or do I try and subvert that idea and make sure that there's space for all the voices that come into the classroom? You know, is there, like, so those are the choices I have to balance. In my practice, do I choose to make work that people assume that I would make? You know, do I make the work that I'm called to make? And so those things, like, there's certain things that outsiders have nothing to do with.
Yes, and okay, I remember.
Okay, good.
I feel like the idea that you can change something without being a part of it or having experienced it in itself is a really colonial idea, because I think it's there's so many nuances and things that you can experience intimately that either contribute to the problem or can contribute to the solution. So I think even like it's a grand idea to somehow not be a part of them or contribute to them, but it also, I don't know if it could create meaningful change without.
Yeah, and I think that's that service part. You know, I think participating is the way that we actually change things. By standing up and saying no, is how we change things. And by making sure that we join organizations and make sure they have like an EDI policy, or making sure that they have like, you know, good best practices when it comes to selecting work for exhibition. You know, like each one of those things has a DNA of sort of that colonial impetus, and so it's our job to snip it out, and it takes a lot of elbow grease, and so we have to participate in one way or the other, or by your going to the woods. Chris.
The way you spoke about that, I'm feeling a kinship in the design field, because right now when we talk about design, a lot of design, like TM, by nature is colonial, right? It's like, hey, I'm gonna talk to you, I'm gonna empathize with you, and I'm gonna take these insights and work on it in a black box and deliver a solution. Like that's like the definition of colonialism. And so to decolonize design often means letting go of the privilege and the title of designer. And I'm curious if, I don't know, I'm just curious what that means, what that maybe makes you folks think about in the concept of being an artist or being a crafts person. Wrestling with similar things, is it different? I don't know, I'm actually curious.
Yeah, I feel that one because I get asked that question, and you end up having to put something on your bio or your website, and all I want to write is just maker. Sometimes nothing's going on up here, but I can't write that, right? Yeah, it's a weird thing because someone said to me the other day, "Oh yeah, you're a curator now." I'm just like, I had just a weird reaction to it, and that whole idea of curation sometimes is in itself problematic, but the labels is still something I grapple with. I don't know if I'll ever have a solid answer for that, but maker I feel comfortable with. This whole, like as you said, the designer, TM, or artist, or it gets tricky sometimes because it almost feels like a label that's just excluding everybody else that's not necessarily doing the thing that gets recognized as that. So I think I'll keep struggling with that one.
Yeah, I think that's a conversation in the art industry too, especially in the high art world, where something that is often said in the art field is that often the artists can't afford the work. Like the people who are buying the work and making this making it like a high-end market are, well, I don't know. I just feel like it doesn't always honor what we're doing. Like spiritually, we're putting our everything into this thing. Like we're putting us into this. So I feel like if art means that you have to cater to the people that are giving the money, or I can't think of like the equivalent of what you explained in the art world, but I feel like if that's what it is, then I don't want to be an artist. Like I would rather just not have a title, because I would rather work towards honoring what we really do and all the voices that are in the field, than claim this really important title that is given money to, I guess.
I myself, I mean, the titles I don't mind. It's, as a textile artist and represented by a gallery, I don't mind. I mean, living in those constructs of those kind of colonial, centers, for me, it's holding that part of my work and holding it close. And so I'm very much, when it comes to collaborations or when it comes to commissions, I'm not there because I find that's where that pull, can come from. And that's where it can dissuade me or veer me off to something that isn't true to myself. So for me, just, having that bubble and that sanctuary between myself and my work, and staying true to that is what's really important to me.
Okay, all right, so we have no more questions. I think we'll wrap up for today. Again, I would like to sincerely thank all the panelists for being involved in this. I would like to thank the Alberta Craft Council for giving me the space to pull this together, for throwing their full support behind me, all the assistance and feedback. I'd like to thank AUARTS. I'd like to thank our anonymous donors. We've had a lot of support with getting this together, and I think it's been great to really hear from people that are not me. I mean, I talk to myself all the time, but that's not the only voice I need to be hearing. So thank you all again for being here, or on-site guests or Zoom guests. Thank you for your lovely questions. And we hope to have more conversations with you all in the future.
Thank you, Shiemara.
Yeah, thank you.
I just wanted you guys to know that everyone says thank you, everyone, very enlightening. Thank you all for a great talk, wonderful to hear about your work and experience. This was very meaningful, thanks everyone, enjoyed this conversation, so I just want to appreciate it.
Oh, thank you all very much. All right, have a lovely weekend.
Will this talk be recorded and available
Yes, yes, it will be available online.
on the internet for an instant?
Hey, how are you?